Again, welcome everyone to today's webinar, What Works? Quality Risk and Hazing Prevention Practice, and the partnership between Holmes Murphy Fraternal Practice CRC Group and the Piazza Center. As we get started today, please type your name, organization, and the role you play into the chat panel. We'd love to be able to welcome you. And right now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Lori Hart to describe the partnership with the CRC Group, HMFP, and the Piazza Center, and what we'll be discussing today. Lori, take it away.
Thank you, Bobby. Hey, everyone. Because it's fall, and it's just how fall works, even though it's early August, I'm driving today. I had to switch in my plans, so I apologize for that. But I did ask Bobby to allow me to hop on here just to introduce this program, this topic, and this partnership. Holmes Murphy, we're big fans, even though we are an insurance broker and we deal with risk and accidents all the time. We're a big fan of doing the work of safety, the work of evidence-based work, the work of research informed. And our job is to help you when you have a problem and want to approach a problem. How do you do it effectively, and how do you do it in a way that's going to make an impact and going to make a difference? I have known Steve Belkamp for a long, long time. And when he came on with the Piazza Center, he started talking to me about this research endowment and the work they were doing. And so I started watching and I started looking, and, you know, I think I said 12 times, like, we really don't, we don't have a lot of funding that we put towards things like this. But the more I watched and the more we started working together, and every time I had a hard issue, like, let's talk about amnesty. He was like, here's 6 articles, let's partner together. We just finished a mentor-mentee resource working together and using research and data and practical work. Every time I kept coming to solutions, I started looking at the Piazza Center more and more and more, and I value that he is creating this reputable place that truly, in honor of Tim Piazza, is trying to create, I believe, safer spaces for students. And you're only as good as a person, but what Steve also is great at is recruiting really strong, great people. I think I've watched Pietro grow up in higher education. We watch Raphael in the NPHD space. Emily, I'm just a fangirl from afar. There's lots of PhDs and EDDs on the call today, but what Steve is doing, I believe, and why Holmes Murphy is investing in this, is that he's bringing really smart people together to think collectively, to carve ideas, to critique ideas, to research ideas, and everybody wants to be at the table and do it in a collaborative way. So I am thrilled that Holmes Murphy has committed $50,000 to this work, and I am thrilled with our collaboration. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Steve to take it away.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you to Holmes Murphy and CRC, and as Lori said, for a major gift to our research endowment. We're going to quickly, again, we got, as Lori said, through relationships, right? And so we want to get to a mini panel with Dr. Matos, Dr. Perlow, and Dr. Sasso, and I'll moderate that here in a second. We're also going to do a short infomercial about the Piazza Center to kick us off. And then we're going to get into some guides and practical guides where to find these research-informed walkthroughs to help you, to help campus folks and to help professionals do this work. So advance, Bobby. That's the outline that I just gave you, and what we're going to do in our 4 sections of this presentation today. Advance again. The center is an endowment, so it means we're going to be here for as long as fraternity and sorority is on the earth. And so the longevity approach, centering students and their needs for safety and well-being is our focus. Our endowment is these folks that are coming in and helping support us. We're at half power, so we're looking at doubling the number, the names on these, or doubling the number of gifts. But here's who has supported us to date, including Holmes Murphy and CRC Group. Can't thank them enough. The research that we're conducting, if you advance, Bobby, the research agenda is safety, and you can see a number of projects that we'll be talking about today in risk prevention and hazardous drinking prevention. We're also looking at the positive side of stronger and what creates stronger fraternity and sorority life. Raphael, Dr. Matos, and I are working on this extraordinary effort. We just kicked it off, a Black Creek listening tour. Excited for that. as well as some other projects around DEIB and anti-Semitism. But again, today we're going to be talking about our projects that really center on student safety and what does that conversation need to look like. Who are involved in the center, as Dr. Hart already mentioned, if you advance. Here's what we look like in terms of our scholars. So we have research fellows, project leads, scholars, and staff, that are comprising the center right now. These are at Penn State and across the United States, actually mostly across the United States. So excited to work with some very, very smart people that we're bringing into the center through some good relationships. The model that we're looking at, if advanced, Bobby, is this quick model to look at it as centering student needs. What are our at-risk students and our most vulnerable populations that we're working with? And let's frame them for today's conversation as the hazers and or the hazees. And so holding that in your mind of our vulnerable students that are potentially at risk and susceptible to these things that we're inheriting from high school. Well, how are the strategic needs to address those? And what are the things that we do in our practice, both on our organizations as well as our campuses to address those things? And then how do we do that? And what are those strategies that we can implement with the highest fidelity, which means quality, fancy word for saying quality. And so that's where we're introducing this concept of quality risk and hazing prevention today. It means skill building. It means alcohol consumption is directly related to nearly all forms of violence. It means, in understanding that, it means interventions must be sustained over time to address individual, group, and community types of behaviors. And how influential are leaders, peers in these conversations. So just to give you a tidbit of what we're going to be talking about today. Advance. The work that we're doing, we combed through the literature. And so Dr. Patrick Biddix was the lead on this project along with Emily and Pietro. But we worked 2 years. This was funded by the North American Interfraternity Conference. To really look through all the literature, the violence prevention literature, everything that we could find related to this thing called hazing, and a lot of the hazardous drinking literature to inform what we're going to be talking to you about today. And so I wanted to give you a frame of reference there. All right, now we're going to turn it to our panelists, and I've got some questions for some folks. But to start out with, and we'll start with you, Emily, and then Pietro and Raphael. What are some promising practices and approaches to hazing prevention? Tell the audience one or two things that is kind of your fan favorite in terms of what a promising approach to risk and hazing prevention.
Thanks, Steve. So, I think sort of at my first approach is at sort of the higher level, right? So what are the components that need to be included? And I really think that any approach to managing risk and hazing prevention has to really focus on who your stakeholders are and the ways in which you're going to engage student voices in coming up with the appropriate contextual solutions. So what's going to work well in one of the chapters represented on the call today might look really different than what's going to work well in another group. And so how do you situate that in the context? And then how do you engage students as part of those conversations? Nothing for them without them is something that the team on this call has heard me say many times. And so I think that's really critical. That peer norming and peer influence would be my number one. The other thing I would say is that it has to be sustained. You can't just sort of do a one-off approach. A keynote during Hazing Prevention Week, important. I highly encourage folks doing it, but it has to be accompanied by lots of other things. And so I would say that those are the two components that I think are really critical in my opinion.
Dr. Sasso?
So I would add peer-based programs like social norming, like peer education, training the trainer models, all work very well. And so we know that those have the highest efficacy in terms of making behavioral sustained change is when you invest your students in the process. It does make cultural change.
Dr. Matos.
I will add to that, and Emily, I like what you said, engaging your different stakeholders and just really contextualizing it. I will add to that, you can't forget about your alumni base, and you have to be able to engage them in. And we focus a lot on collegians, but understand that the alumni are a group that you have to really consider in the factor. Also with that, and what I've seen in my experience, you have to think about not just the context, but that historical value of the organization. You have to situate it within that, and you can't ignore traditions and that rites of passage context. Like that's something that, you know, we all gravitate towards outside of fraternity sorority life and other aspects of our lives. So you really have to think about your approach. How does it fit within that? And how can it support and augment the positive values or traditions that our members hold dear?
Advanced, Bobby. Thank you, panelists. Dr. Perlow, play, gender performance. You've written about this, you've studied this, and how does it intersect with hazing? If you want to maybe describe what this concept of play and how it relates to gender performance.
Yeah, happy to. So my background's in anthropology. And in anthropology, there's sort of 4 different ways that humans interact with one another. You have work. I think we all pretty much know what that means. We have ritual. We certainly in the fraternity context understand what that means. And then you have something called communitas, which is like, you know, if you're at a football game all together and you're all experiencing the same experience together. And then you have something called play. And the idea around play is that it different from communitas is in that it occurs in a situation distinct or separate from reality in some ways. So there's an element of maybe make believe or pretend, or you're constructing a reality that isn't always tied to sort of the real world consequences and behaviors. And I keep thinking about it in the context, the Barbie movie just came out, and I keep thinking about my experience as a child playing with Barbies and the worlds I constructed with my friends and the ways in which we pretended and played, and how you could pivot at just a moment because I said, oh, no, Barbie's not going to marry Ken. Barbie's going to marry so-and-so. And then everybody, if you're playing with me, then you went along with the game. It's like improv in some ways. And so I started thinking a lot about this idea of play. And I wondered, is hazing play is a question I've been grappling with. And it really centers around this question that I've always had as a practitioner, which is when, you know, if I talk to students and I say, hey, that thing you're doing, I actually think that might be hazing. Can we talk about that? And often they would say to me, I don't know what you're talking about. We're just horsing around, or we're just having fun. What's the big deal? And I started to realize that the ways I was talking to students about hazing, this is against the rules, you're going to hurt someone, they're not agreeing with me because they're not experiencing it in that way in many cases. And I don't use the term play to trivialize what's happening. It absolutely can be dangerous. It can absolutely harm folks. And there's lots of adult play out in the world where people do dangerous, crazy things like rock climbing and, you know, parachute jumping and things like that. So we play all the time as humans. And so is hazing a form of play? And related to that, I did a lot of work with fraternities specifically in my research, but I think this applies for women's groups too, particularly among college populations and particularly among gendered organizations. That play intersects with the sort of establishment of your own gender identity within the group. And I found through my research that a lot of times the men I was surveying were behaving in ways that they thought the group expected of them from a gender perspective. They wanted to prove that they were the most masculine. They wanted to prove that they could hack it, and that they were doing it because they thought that's what the group expected of them. But interestingly, I found that in most cases, they were all less norm conforming than they thought the group was, right? So they were all performing to this level that didn't actually exist if you averaged their gender identities together. So how do these things intersect? So play occurs in a space that's often separate from reality. It results in generating a sense of shared meaning. So you think about in the fraternal sorority context, you're generating a sense of in-group, out-group, a sense of meaning, that rite of passage that Dr. Matos talked about, and often has some form of make-believe or some sort of game associated with it. So we see that happening in things like competitions that happen during the new member experience. We see that happening, something called, like a game of chance, where you don't have control over the rules, or your skill isn't what's going to determine your success. So I think about some rigged tests or that fake new member exam or things like that. You'll see things that are that I labeled as mimicry in my research that have an element of theater. So dressing in a costume or nudity or manipulation of the body, branding, things like that. And then you also see things called that I labeled as structured chaos. So often that involves alcohol or drugs or other substances, blindfolding, kidnapping, dropping off where you don't know where you are, where you don't have control of the world around you. So coming back to the question, how does the concept of play and gender performance intersect with hazing? I believe that the groups, as they're bringing new members in, are using hazing as a way to police gender performance, and they're doing it in the context of a play environment. And in that play environment, students aren't necessarily problematizing some of the behaviors that they're engaging in. They're not thinking about the harm associated with the activity that they might be doing, and as a result, folks get injured or impacted. And so punchline here, I guess I would say, I certainly could talk about it a lot, but the punchline for you all, I would say, is that as we're talking to students, we're engaging in conversations with them, they're experiencing something that is constructing powerful meanings for them in a context that they're not necessarily seeing the risk, or they're not problematizing what's happening there. And so we have a responsibility to disrupt that in some ways, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later.
Yeah, that suspended reality, Emily, that you were just referring to. And again, as a campus-based professional for over 25 years, I saw a lot of that suspension of reality, and where campus policies and administrative conversations were completely missing students. And again, I love your involving them and always involving them phrase that you share. And how important that is. So we actually connect our policies and our practices to what the student experience is, because we're involving them in solutions, right? Yeah.
Well, we have to message to them in a way that they're actually going to hear us. Right?
Yeah.
They're not hearing what we're saying. It's a lot of effort for not a lot of impact.
Yeah. And I would add that we have to get better at not one size fits all approaches, especially for campus-based folks. And that has to be nuanced by council types. And Dr. Matos already shared that. We really need to get more specific, and one size statements and one size definitions do not work for distinct communities on our college campuses. So our next question is for Dr. Sasso. Students view, again, kind of referencing what I just kind of shared, institutions and what students think about current approaches to hazing prevention. Share, Pietro, a little bit more about what you view that student and institutional relationship is all about.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a lot of shifts in the way students perceive information and the sources, right? And so there's kind of a higher level of scrutiny and criticism in the lenses that students are like applying, right? And so I think depending on the council type, there are some tensions between what those look like, right? So specifically, a lot of students are leaning towards trusting their national organizations more, and the national staff more than they are campus-based student affairs folks and actually and other advisors. So I think when we think about interventions, what's really important is that it comes from a authoritative figure, right, who students perceive as trustworthy, right? And relationships matter. And we've said that a lot. And specifically, students are responding to speakers. Yes, it's like Dr. Perlow said, it's great to have the Hazing Week speaker or the alumni panel, right? Like those are always important. But students are responding again to peer-based approaches, right? So peer education, peer leaders, social norming, and using the education and using these student leaders as stakeholders to drive cultural change on your campus. And so what we're really seeing again is students trusting peers and influencers more than they trust campus-based staff, and leaning into, maybe this is a COVID change, trusting national staff more than campus-based staff. And so we see that shift, and so using and involving all of those stakeholders in your targeted programming is really important.
And I would echo something what Dr. Sasso just said. And again, combining what actually Dr. Perlow and Dr. Matos also said is by really understanding distinct subpopulations of students and connecting with them at their level of what their definitions are around hazing, as an example, that starts to build a bridge, and it starts to build a relationship, to have that connectivity to students, to help them draft those statements that they then can be a part of the change that we're looking for, versus a large one-size-fits-all approach and a definition that completely doesn't honor subgroups that are very distinct. And again, that's where potentially I'm using the royal we here, campus-based folks are being asked to say, hey, go drum this statement, this well-crafted with lawyers in the room statement about hazing prevention, and make sure everyone on campus knows this thing. Well, that sounds good for compliance, but it doesn't work for prevention. And if we're really thinking about student safety and prevention, we've got to come out of the ivory tower and get involved in relationships to build those understandings. And we're going to be so much further down the field if we do that approach. So, all right, our next question it goes to Dr. Matos. How do we shift and address these hazing attitudes? Which this is all kind of flowing together nicely here. But yeah, Dr. Matos, what's your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much, Steve. That's a great question. And I think one of the things in my work, I've learned to look at is a difference between behaviors and attitudes, right? And so what Dr. Perlow was talking about, right? Oh, I didn't know I was doing this, like, oh, this constitutes hazing, right? At that form, that fits more within behaviors. And if you can offer someone something different to do, right, that they'll be able to get away from that, because they genuinely didn't understand that this was inappropriate, because no one had told them that before, right? But then when you're talking about attitudes, right, that gets into belief systems and values. And that's what I was saying at the beginning, like our approaches can't disregard that, right? I think of myself as a student in those situations and why I engage in certain behaviors that today I totally would not participate in. It was that belief that this was essential to the organizational culture. So I think part of shifting those attitudes is really thinking about how do we get to the why students are doing what they're doing, really being able to engage with them and understand that. We talked about a lot about not just a one-off, but it's really sustaining, not just that, like it has to be consistent in building, right? And thinking about what you say to a first-year student, right? That's going to look different than a senior, and recognize that maybe some that within that matrix are just not going to participate, right? Which is okay to be able to understand that. So I think my background is in different communication methods and styles and systems. I think that's what makes the most sense to me. And I look at how people form meaning. So when we're talking about shifting attitudes, we have to understand how our members, our chapters, our communities, how are they forming meaning together, right? And meaning is very dynamic, and it happens in the moment as things moving. So I think I looked a lot of health behavior theories because I think those are very applicable when you're talking about shifting the behavior. So we'll tell students to do something, but we have to think about what are the support systems that they have in place to execute that behavior, right? And so if you're telling a student stop hazing and you tell them all these different things, they know it's against the law, they know you can lose your school, your scholarship, get kicked out of school, lose that, but you still participate in it. There is something happening there, right? So a lot of those theories talk about someone will execute a behavior that you want them to do if they feel that they know how to do it. And sometimes we tell them to do it and they'll look at us with that bobblehead answer, yeah, we understand, right? But they don't know how to go about doing it. And then they don't have that peer support, right? We already talked about that. So that's another key part there. But I think it's also when you I also look at what the leadership says, right? Not just the campus professionals, we focus a lot on that, but also the organizational leaders. If you have national, international presidents that are talking about and glorifying some of these behaviors, right? Like that is then further solidifying the fact that, well, this is important to us, right? And so I think that to shift the attitudes, right, is not just a approach, but approaches. And so one organization can take different approaches to determining based on what they want to accomplish, right? And what they're trying to eradicate and what different stages their members are at.
Thank you. I'm going to ask usually the end question. If you could snap your fingers, what simple change would you want to make for an approach to risk and harm prevention? This was not a part of our script, by the way. So this is spontaneous for our panelists. So just Emily, Pietro, Raphael, just what pops into your head is like, if you could snap your fingers and ask an organization to do something different or a campus to do something different, what would that be? And unmute and go for it.
Well, I think for me, and I mean, it's been said before, but I feel like it's important that we highlight this, is how do we construct the experience with our members? And how do we ask our members, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What do you want to do, right? I think that we want to shy away and say that, rites of passage is wrong, that people shouldn't prove that they are valuable to the organization, right? We tell our members we have to show our value to the community, but we shouldn't expect the same of people that want to join. And to me, I feel that, when you look at college admissions, that's what they're asking us to do. When you want to apply for admissions, you want to get a scholarship, to apply for any jobs, you got to show the proper credentials. So I think that if we really want to eradicate some of these behaviors, I think we want to lean into that. And so to teach our members, this is the healthy, appropriate, and productive way to go about really vetting and getting to these goals you want to accomplish.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I just want to build on that. I think if I wanted an organization or a campus to do something different, I think I would ask folks to shift their mindset around sort of the motivations for hazing elimination, right? So we take a very regulatory, legalistic approach with students, and it's not motivational, to Dr. Matos's point. And instead, if we understand the deep-seated sort of psychosocial needs that our students have, and we craft a conversation that identifies those needs, helps students achieve those in healthier ways, that I think could be a game changer.
Pietro?
I think I would have, again, in a perfect world, if I could snap my fingers, more resources, right, to train staff, right, on the current practices and models. And we would have dedicated staff, both either on the national office side or on the campus side, right? Just train staff to run and educate students and work with students in more like individual ways to create peer-based programming that we know works well. So I think just having trained staff and full-time staff to be able to take this on.
Yeah. I mean, I asked myself the own question. I mean, and I said it's at the second annual anti-hazing summit at the state of Ohio last week. And I referenced if I could travel back in time of my 25 plus years of working directly with fraternity sorority students and look at the strategies of a fraternity sorority-like program, I would choose rich relationships with students and prevention strategies, and probably stop doing all the other things, or at least do them a lot less of trying to do the other things. And for years and years, we tried to cover all the strategies, all the awards programs, all the things. And I wish I just really emphasized rich relationships and prevention strategies coming from the campus, and got really good at prevention strategies. As the number one thing of spending my time and energy in, versus trying to do all of the bells and whistles that is the fraternity sorority-like program, and the programs and activities and leadership retreats and things like that. And I wish I just focused on those things to get our campuses to be much more safer and really center on the students' needs. Again, framing that these students are some of the most vulnerable students that are on college campuses, given some of the behaviors that they're exhibiting. And if we reframe that as a need-based approach, I think we'll then get those campus resources that Dr. Mato or Dr. Sasso just referenced, and staff this area the way the literature in the 70s said we should. Which that's one of my soapboxes. I'll stop now because I'll derail the conversation. All right, we're going to switch now to more academic. So thank you, panelists. We're going to get back to you and asking you some questions about some of our guides here in a second. To set up the guides, we're going to talk about a model. And so advancing to the thoughts here on a model that was created out of that the literature, combing through the literature, is we created a conceptual model. It's big, it's dense, and so we're going to geek out on for 3 slides here, and then we're get to the practical aspects of it. But we just want to set this up is that this is the work of Dr. Perlow, Dr. Sasso, Dr. Biddix, even Tracy Maxwell is a part of this from longstanding conversations. So and Pietro is going to explain it to here, but it is explanatory, comprehensive. It builds on other models, so it builds on Dr. Allen's work and Madden's work, the SAMHSA model, and most I would say is the Gordy Center's Apple model, though working with athletics for over 25 years. So it builds on those models in its approach. Dr. Sasso, you want to walk us through it? So. You're muted. You're muted, Pietro. There you go. Oh, you're muted again. Pietro, you're muted again.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Now you're unmuted. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. Okay. So let me break down this model for you here. So you see there are 3 levels. There is like individual or organizational and community. And so what this basically tells us is that we know from the research that hazing begins through socialization processes in high school, right? Through athletics, through other informal group participation, through summer camps, right? So that high school socialization process, students bring those experiences around hazing, intimidation, bullying, harassment, and it's crystallized a little bit more through hazing processes and their reinforcement of hazing processes, right? So hazing or harassment, intimidation, bullying, as well as micro-level hazing processes become a lot more intense in college, right? I think we see that in, in athletics, marching bands, other things, and then they then kind of permeate across campus. And so we see hazing exist in multiple spacing across campus, right? Hazing is not just a sorority, fraternity concept, right? We see this at Northwestern in athletics. We see this in marching bands. We see this nationally, right? So this model, the horizontal hazing concept, is that hazing happens across campus at multiple levels, right? So we see it at like an individual level where students are subjected to hazing or reinforce hazing specifically because they want to belong, because of larger conformity to gender norms, because they are looking to increase their self-confidence both as a hazer and as a victim of hazing. At a larger individual or organizational level, you see hazing because it's a filter, it's a way to reinforce power, and it's a way to test group fitness. Aldo Tomino's work also talks like largely about that, and it's a way to provide a rite of passage as a way to mark someone's transition into actual membership, right? So sociologically, it happens for a number of reasons, but we know that people that present hazing in one space are more than likely presenting hazing in other spaces, right? So people transmit hazing across multiple spaces that they bring from high school. That's what this model largely tells us. And then at a community level, right, we have kind of these nuances across campuses, right? But specifically, we know, can we go back one slide, sorry? At a community level, we know specifically that chapters use hazing to compete, right? So organizational performance is reinforced through hazing, right? They use hazing as a test of like fitness or as a filtration to find the best people, right? And so that kind of anthropological culture setting is happening at a larger level on campuses, right? And that usually involves and is tethered to norms around alcohol and drug use, and larger power structures on campuses, right? So those power dynamics don't look the same at like a residential liberal arts college or an HBCU compared to like a larger Power 5 conference. Next slide. So, and then again, this is tied to larger concepts around values and the perceived value. So the value setting process is one inherent way to largely disrupt hazing as well.
Thank you, Pietro. So again, we said we were going to geek out. This is a lot. It's a very dense model, but we've distilled them into practical guides. So now we're going to switch to kind of the rubber meeting the road, so to speak. So it guides that, and so again, we're taking research and pulled them into 1-2 page, maybe a little longer, and we try to add prompts to these. So if you advance, and again, they're all on a website. So we got a QR code for you if you want to pull out your phone and get to the website where these are all listed for you all. And you can download the PDF, click on it, download the PDF, and use these. Copy the PDF, include in other presentations. They're completely open source. So have at it in terms of disseminating these in your organizations and in your campus communities. So completely open source. For those of you who are old enough to know what a box set is, I have used that terminology. I need to come up with a better one. But yeah, it's the album, right? It's the anthology moment of looking at hazing from its origins and its beginnings, and identifying that. All the way through trying to understand this model again from what we've inheriting in college from high school and how we're going to deal with it. And so we're going to walk through a couple of these today, just a couple of them, but we have quite a bit of them on the website. If you haven't opened the link and advancing to the next slide here, here's a list of a few of them. So again, I already mentioned the detection of hazing. We did focus groups broken down by council type. So this isn't just about one form of tradition. So it's not just historically white fraternities, but we looked at multicultural. We looked at the Black Greek tradition here. We've looked at really digging into how do we, as a hazing program, and again, this was still done campus, and it follows one of our major studies that is looking at how do we identify and practice identifying different forms of data in our practitioners' work. And it's not just like, oh, we collect this form of data, but there's actually distinct forms of data that we need to be paying attention to, specifically to what hazing looks like on our college campuses, to look at the implementation of programs, and that's a different set of data, implementation data. And then there's this thing called efficacy data. How do we know it actually works? And so we're really defining 3 distinct lanes, as well as a plan for how to keep and practice those 3 distinct lanes. As Pietro said, if we're going to get serious about this, we actually have to build a staffing model to do this work. Or, as I said, I need to let go of a lot of things that I was doing to make space for doing this well. Which then comes back to the word quality in our presentation today. Implementation fidelity, that's all about the quality implementation, and cannot harp on that one enough. And then Lori is the co-author, and Holmes Murphy and CRC group, and our assistance with and partnership with the Piazza Center to develop 2 of these steps to develop a peer mentor and mentee program out yesterday. I think there's a spelling mistake in there, if you can find that. So we'll literally, we just authored that and got that published today. Last night, and then steps to develop an amnesty policy, One of my favorite guides to share out there. It walks folks through how to think and frame a solid amnesty policy. You can see our website as well here to find these, or like I said, hopefully you grab that QR code. Next slide, again, is just a demonstration of the two projects that Lori and I have collaborated on. Steps to develop this peer mentor and mentee program, realizing that, gosh, a lot of organizations do this work, but what is our conversation around actually thinking through the steps to do this work and to do it well? We've talked and resourced a lot about the problems that come out of these specific events, and a lot of the stories around the tragedies that have occurred in fraternities and sororities deal with these types of programs and events. However, we haven't talked about, well, how do we actually do it and do it with quality and positive that's anti-hazing. And so this is a guide to really emphasize that peer mentorship is a phenomenal learning experience. Colleges use it all the time and celebrate it. There's even national conferences around peer education and mentoring that higher education puts on. How do we become part of that conversation? Amnesty is one of the proven things that works on college campuses to lead folks to intervening. And so it's proven time and time again to be a positive thing. So how do we do it and how do we do it well? So again, two guys to talk about. And then for our, 15 minutes left, we're going to cruise through some examples and try to get us, so if we could advance, here's the three ones that we're going to talk about. And again, it's using the model, situational strength, which is a fan favorite from Dr. Perlow. And hopefully we get time to explore that today. And enacting change at the levels that we talked about, the individual, organizational, and community level. Advance, Bobby. And so this just, again, emphasizes what this guide that's on the website is broken down to really address and walk you through these things. So leading into it, if we could advance slide here, we're going to get into a little bit more in depth about what do we think here in terms of the individual, organizational, and community level. So we addressed about who's more susceptible at the individual level. Organizational, what are those normatives that we need to be paying attention to in our organizations on our campuses? And community, who's setting the bar for status? And what does that look like? And drinking trends, physicality in our organizations, those types of things. So these are the things to kind of pay attention to. And if we advance, I'm going to now turn it over and ask a few, pointed questions here of our panelists. So when we talk about understanding and harnessing peer norms, Dr. Perlow, what does that mean? What does it mean to look at and harnessing peer norms? What does that?
Absolutely. So, I think many of us see this happen all the time. Students look at what other students are wearing, what's cool to wear, what's cool to do, what's cool to post on social media. And so if we know that there are influencers, both whether that's at the chapter level, at the regional level, particularly for our groups that are well connected regionally, who are the powerful influencers? I often find that they're not the chapter leaders. They're not the folks that you're talking to on the phone if they're calling your organization. They're going to be some of the members who have lots of power in groups, but aren't necessarily running for that formal office role. And so how do you figure out who those folks are and what are they telling folks that you should do? Yeah. What are they telling folks that's cool? And if we could better understand who those influencers are and get them to send a sort of pro or anti-hazing, pro healthy choices messages, then I think we'd see better behaviors among folks.
Excellent. Dr. Matos, the next, providing advising multiple pathways for peer relationships. How do members join a community and not just a chapter?
That's a great question. And I think that one is a tough one because ultimately, all of us really are having a very localized experience, even those of us that are connected regionally, internationally. So I think part of it has to do with, I think from your new member education standpoint, even before then, right? Like how do we talk about the entire network of the organization as a collective, right? We want to talk about that. I think thinking about doing new member education, how are we teaching members that they're joining something that's bigger than them? I think one of the things that we just did recently, we reactivated the chapter in my alma mater. And one of the things that we did was have the three of them that were just initiated in the spring attend our conclave in Houston. And that was very major for them because they take great pride in being from their institution, but they got to see the fraternity on a larger scale. And they got to meet with members that span, their peers that were just recently initiated. And the brother has been in their fraternity for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I think that's an important piece. So I would probably say you have to have a plan. You have to be very intentional and really making sure that they're touching into those different pathways. And you have to have a guide to walk them through that process on a regular.
Yeah. It's funny, we have another project at the center is our fraternity story experience survey, and there's a qualitative question where students can write in, and how many students write in after they've attended a national meeting, how they're they rethink fraternity and sorority. So it's kind of like an answer is get them to your national meetings and things like that, because they literally reframe and think about the experience much more differently because they have that broader connection and they really can see that it's not just this local chapter, but it's this larger experience. So it's and or if you're a local organization, how it's important to really connect with some alum outside of the chapter. All right, again, we're just quickly glancing through these guides, but hopefully we've made them and question prompts that really are practical to walk you all through these. But looking at the next one at the organizational level, Pietro, in seeking to understand org norms, who holds influence over the peers and how do we engage them?
So I think Dr. Perlow spoke a little bit to this. It's like often what the research calls like the quiet influencers, right? So they're the students who set the chapter norms, and they're usually your senior leaders, right? So in your IFC organizations, it's your super senior, right? You taking the Van Wilder year, right? Or in your culturally based organizations, it might be alumni, right, or the graduate chapter. And so oftentimes it's not the front facing students in the formal leadership roles, but the people in the background. And so to understand that, that's where you need to start, right? Mm-hmm. And that understanding that each chapter is not the same as the other chapter nationally too, right? Yeah. There are specific nuances between them. And so I think the more that we use that approach, right, the more, we can start to have tailored interventions.
Emily, encouraging orgs to dispel myths, process and plans and new member activities. Talk to us a little bit about that. And also, Dr. Matos, we've talked about this too in terms of transparency, especially with NPAC organizations. So if you all want to look at that in terms of that as a practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us have probably experienced a student telling us, but we've always done this and it's never been a problem before. And really, it just started a year ago, or it got modified to be unacceptable a year ago. The institutional memory of our students is very short. And so the more we can help document processes at the chapter level, I think the better we are. The more we can hold chapters accountable to following if there is a national organization model plan, and actually getting students to tell you what are the spaces they fill in between the structured activities you might provide. The more you can get folks being thoughtful and planful, thinking about outcomes and mapping that out, the more consistency you'll have from year to year. And I think I'm going to let Dr. Matos talk a little bit about the transparency piece, because I think that's incredibly important too.
So I think that that's a big part of what happens is we don't necessarily share with the members or with the prospective members, even within our organizations, right? I think this is very interesting from my experience. We become so secretive that even for members, some things are like secrets that shouldn't be secrets, and so they don't understand. My work now, I manage our portal, and access to our information is there, but members are getting half-truths and repackaged information from someone else, and they're not accessing it themselves. So I think for us as an organization, one, we have to understand the difference between what is secret, right? And that's pretty much what's contained in the rituals. We have to understand what is confidential, right? So what happened at our conclave in Houston, that's really nobody's business but the members, right? But if you find out if you hear something, I mean, it's confidential information, not that great of an issue. And then there's stuff that's like public information, right? And so I think we have to be able to help our members discern between those, so that we're not creating this space where we don't talk about anything related to the organization, because then that creates a space. You know, when I work with our campus partners and our chapters are telling them, well, we can't tell you about our intake process, I have to step in and say, well, they may not be able to tell you exactly what we're talking about specifically, but they can give you general ideas. They can tell you about the scheduling and when it's happening. Our date of initiation is not a secret. Like, they can tell you as the campus administrator, because you need to know this information, right? Because we understand it. So I think that part is really important. We have to really be able to explain and help our members discern what exactly is stuff that we shouldn't share and what is the stuff that's okay for us to share. And then who is it okay for us to share this information with?
I think there's some case law and recent case law also that scaffolds this, that asks organizations to be more transparent than ever before. I also think this is from working with college students for years and years on this discussion, it's almost a developmental litmus test in terms of how they see this as a very clear, like, it's all secret. And so that I think they take the ritual meaning that Dr. Matos said, right? This is private and only for members, and they extrapolate that out to everything. Because they connect it all, that the whole thing is, versus what is just the ceremonial part that should be shared amongst members, versus this is actually a larger conversation, and what part we're meant to be absolutely sacred and secret, and what's parts of this. And so I think as a thought, again, snap my fingers thought here for organizations and how they can actually share and say, no, this is the part that's secret, and this is the only part that is secret, versus extrapolating it to all these other things. And so I think that's an important conversation that organizations can be engaged in. And I would say for campus-based professionals, I think I akin it to being a parent and having a teenage daughter at one point in my life where I get the surface answer if I just ask the question once. And if I ask the questions twice, I get a little more. And if I ask it a third time, she knows and then I asked her to take off her sunglasses, I got a fourth answer. Yeah, so you just got to care to ask the right questions and keep on asking questions a little bit more in depth to get to the meat of things. So, all right, I'm looking at this at the community level. So our last level here in our time, and thinking about how status is assigned between groups. Dr. Perley, you want to talk to this because you kind of referenced this earlier.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of our groups have an aspirational group that they want to be more like, or feel like they compete against. And what happens is that those groups tend to benchmark against each other and try to one up each other, do a bit more, be bigger, be, whatever. And so I think that then leads to some adoption of, well, they're doing XYZ as part of their new member process, and we need to do that more, but more distinctly us. And so I think you see some kind of hands on top of hands, if you will, metaphorically over time. And so, when I think about your roles, it's really trying to understand, where does your organization fit in that status structure? And then I would encourage you to ask yourself, how are people being rewarded by engaging in hazing behaviors? Are they viewed as harder to join and therefore cooler? Are they getting social rewards because of that? And, helping, I think, chapters think about different ways in which they can be measured, how you measure success as an organization or a campus, and really reframing how people are thinking about that. Because if they're defining their success as having the best parties, and the best parties are great because they attract the partners that they want to date, and the only way they do that is by having the hardest new member program, then you've got this really tough cycle of reward, and so you've got to undo that if you're going to address that.
Thank you. Pietro, understanding relationships between groups. Can you talk a little bit about the sociology behind that?
Yeah, so what's important to know specifically is that we're seeing more hazing shared between organizations, right? So not just chapters, but like the marching band with the co-ed service fraternity, right? There's a lot of crossover across student organizations in hazing, and so that shows kind of the interconnectedness and the horizontal concepts of hazing.
Mm-hmm. I'd also say in some work we unearthed by Burke, I believe it is, structural holes between organizations in terms of the members that hold those mindsets. And I think this has really big implications for how we do conduct on college campuses, that by eradicating an organization, you do not necessarily eradicate your hazing problem. You potentially just dispersed it in 4 or 5 other organizations, which has been my lived experience a number of times on a college campus that I served at for over almost 2 decades. But also again, scaffolded by literature here from organizational, that those mindsets are not just within one organization, but organization A and B and potentially C hold reference groups that hold those patterns of behavior. So again, thinking about how we approach individual as well as organizational conduct in just in some different ways. All right, last but not least, and this is a hard ask for 2 minutes, Dr. Perlow, but situational strength, you want to quickly walk us through that, and we might go a little bit long here.
Yeah. So situational strength is a concept that's applied very heavily in the business workplace sociology environment. And it looks at this idea around what compels certain folks to behave in certain ways, and what's happening in the environment that encourages that kind of behavior. And so a situation can be strong in that folks are getting clear messages about how they're supposed to behave. That messaging is happening consistently. There are constraints the constraints are low to exhibit the behavior you want to see, and then there are low consequences as well. And so when we think about that in the context of hazing, I often think about walking down fraternity row when I was in college, and there were clear messages everywhere when everybody had plastic on the windows during sort of the typical initiation week period of time. There were clear messages to me as a student that hazing was tolerated and accepted and expected on the campus. Even if once I crossed that main drag onto the full campus, I was hearing messages that it wasn't. But everywhere I was looking, I was seeing pretty clear messages that hazing was happening. It felt like maybe the university isn't doing anything about it, because I see this as clearly happening, but there's no action taken. So maybe it's acceptable, or maybe folks are indifferent. And so I want to challenge you all, and I definitely encourage you to look at the resource in more depth, because I'm obviously covering this very, very quickly, but to dig in and think a little bit about, if I wanted to disrupt where these messages were clear and consistent, where the constraints were low and the consequences were low for participating in hazing, what could that look like? So can you pop to the next slide? So, back one, please. Thank you. So here, there are a couple of different action steps that we outline in the guide, and there's a couple here. First and foremost, how do you change the perception that nobody does anything about this? Everybody knows it's happening and nobody's saying anything. How do you very publicly help folks understand that you do take decisive action? How do you create spaces for folks to report? And I think more importantly, making sure that we have regular visibility. So for our org folks on the call today, how are we making sure that there is a presence? If you have traveling staff, are they there? Are they equipped to see, confront, and address behaviors in a constructive way? So I really want to encourage folks training your volunteers so that they can have good, healthy conversations. Not going back to what Dr. Mato said, not a don't do this, but a how do we reframe this? How do we change the reward system? How do we disrupt the clarity of messages that say this is what's expected of you, and change it to a haze-free experience is what we expect of you. I really would encourage folks to check out this resource. I think it can be really thought-provoking for folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're at time. How quickly the hour flew by here. Again, I'm sure slides will be shared. The website is there under hazing prevention resources. Or email us at the Piazza Center, and we'll get you the documents. Or participate in the conversation that we're having. We're continuing to evolve the documents. Again, that model is really dense. And so there's probably, I would hazard to guess, probably 15, 20 more guides that we'll be able to produce here. So again, it kind of comes back to resources. Please thank our donors, because we can't do this work without our research endowment supporters. So please thank them, and looking forward to resourcing this conversation in perpetuity with y'all. Again, thank you to Holmes Murphy and the CRC group for their generosity and supporting us. And back to you, Bobby and Lori, thank you for having us participate.
Do you want to do a quick little commercial about your webinar next week?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Bobby. Yep, on August the 15th, we have an opportunity. Again, email if you haven't got an invitation thus far. And we'll send you a link to hear from researchers. So you're going to be hearing from Dr. Jeremiah Chin is co-hosting the event at Vice President of Student Affairs at Boise State. And we have Dr. Rob Teresi, biobehavioral health and psychology, won $40 million in NIH funds over his illustrious career, who's our project lead, and Dr. Patrick Biddix talking about a project on what is quality. It's a very similar title actually to this one, but looking at hazing prevention and specifically a study that we've launched with 6 major institutions in the United States this past year, and what we're finding out of that, and forecasting what the changes are going to look like and past that. So again, would love for folks to attend that. And sharing lists, we'll find a way to send you those invitations if you haven't received it so far. So thank you, Bobby.
We have a link on our website to that
fantastic.
webinar as well. Shameless full plug here, holmesmurphyfraternal.com. We'll have this recording posted. We've got all kinds of links and resources. So please check that out. Thank you so much to this wonderful panel. What great insight you have, and your commitment to the fraternal community is just wonderful to see. We really appreciate your sharing your time with us today, and look for an email including the recording link and resources sometime in the next few days.
Thank you all.